Thank you for hitting play, and welcome to the series we're calling Data Pioneers. We're bringing together the brightest minds in the healthcare industry, supporting the transition to value-based care. We'll be highlighting the best practices, tools, lessons, and advice with a focus on data and analytics. I'm your host, Rich Waller from WellStack, and we're very excited to have you join us today. All right, welcome to Data Pioneers. Pam Saechow, Sundeep, Desai, really great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having us, Rich.
Yep. Thanks, Rich.
Excellent. So anytime that we get to feature on the show, what I would consider truly mission-driven founders, I get really excited. So having the opportunity to spend some time today with Pam and Sundeep is really an honor for us. So maybe Pam, if you can kick us off, why don't you share a little bit about Ellit Groups, kind of the mission that really drives your work in healthcare, and then kicks off there, and then we'll move on and hear a little bit from Sundeep.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. It's always fun to talk to somebody that I know so well. So thanks for having us today. Really appreciate it. A little bit about Ellit Groups. I think you know this about me, but probably a lot of your audience doesn't. I actually developed a love for healthcare at a very early age because of the way I was brought up by my grandmother. She was a single mom at the time and raising 8 of her kids. And when my mother passed away as an adopted child, she took me in, and she practiced integrated medicine in Laos, in the village, which included herbal and acupuncture. And so coming to the US at an early age, I think about 9 years old, once I learned how to speak English, she realized that my English interpretation allowed her to support navigating the healthcare verticals and horizontals in the community where they can't speak English. So going through that exercise really taught me the love. And I would say that in terms of Ellit and being formed, we've always really focused on the fact that our job is to really bridge the gap between operations and IT, to drive operational excellence while keeping patients at the center of everything that we do. Because at the end of the day, that's who we serve.
That's amazing. And Sundeep, as the CMIO, in that role, you have a really great clinical background. Tell us a little bit about your background in healthcare and some of your experience.
Sure. So my background in healthcare, started obviously back in medical school. At that time, I had to make a choice of going into computers, which I loved, and going into medicine, which I also loved. But there was really no combined path at that time. So I chose medicine and did my residency, and shortly after had the opportunity to try an EHR. This was back in 1996. And I jumped at the opportunity because I was tired of handwriting our notes. We weren't allowed to dictate it back then, so we had to handwrite them. So jumped at the opportunity, and ever since have been on this path of healthcare IT, and have loved it ever since. And really has been my passion. While I still practice clinical medicine when I get a chance, really my passion is with health IT. So that's really how I got started with informatics, and eventually became board certified in clinical informatics, and now enjoy helping healthcare clients really take full advantage of all their technology that they have, and some of the newer ones that we are helping them adopt. So that's kind of been my journey in health informatics.
And how is that, kind of clinical background help shaped, how you help healthcare organizations leverage data and technology? I imagine it really gives a powerful, unique kind of, I'd say kind of lens on that versus coming either purely from technology or operations.
Yes, no, it does. I've been fortunate to be able to really experience health IT as a user, as well as somebody who implements it. So I've seen the benefits that it can have, as well as some of the pitfalls that we have to be aware of as we implement this technology. I'm a firm believer in what used to be the triple aim, then the quadruple aim, and now the quintuple aim in healthcare. And that's, improving, the patient experience, reducing the per capita cost of healthcare, improving the health of populations, improving the clinician experience, and now improving health equity. And I really believe technology and a data-driven approach to healthcare will get us to achieve those aims. some of the barriers, unfortunately, that we still are facing, just a few of them are, data standardization, some of the costs involved, and still a lack of well-trained informatics folks in the field. So I think that's one thing that really we try to help with, is to help people understand the value of that. When I first started in this path, we worked hard to explain to people what informatics even was, let alone the value of hiring people in informatics. But even to this day, we still find ourselves having to explain that. So I think that really is something that we try to focus on.
Well,
Absolutely.
and to that effect, Sundeep, probably something very worth sharing, because of that passion that's fueled kind of by your own practice. Here at Ellit Group, we do spend a lot of time. One thing we offer is actually we call informatics packages. So we know that not everybody has the budget in today's world to spend, right? In terms of putting a large budget together. But we do realize that everybody has opportunities to enhance different areas that they want to focus on, and not everybody has the exact same priorities for those enhancements. That Sundeep's worked really hard on creating these informatics packages that are focused on certain areas you want to focus on, so people can pick and choose almost kind of like what makes sense to them for a la carte stuff. But in addition to that, we understand sometimes either you don't have access to those informaticist talents. So we offer informatics talents even at a managed services level for this is how many hours you get to kind of help your organization out. So that's really kudos to Sundeep for kind of, I think, his background, what he brings into it, because we do recognize how important it is to have that informaticist talent to bridge the gap between operations and the technology and how those come together as one, right, to drive those outcomes.
Absolutely. And kind of coming back to in your intro, you mentioned, Pam, that passion or that mission of bridging the gap between operations and IT. Maybe, give us a few examples on, how this approach has worked, kind of some of the measurable outcomes you've seen at clients, and some just examples of that, kind of bridging that gap.
Yeah, that's absolutely actually extremely near and dear to my heart. One of my most favorite things I did, I was given an opportunity at one of our clients, which is actually a safety net organization in the Bay Area. And anybody who's in California understands in safety net, this program called QIP, right, which is an incentive-based program that rewards you truly for incentives to drive measurable outcomes. There's probably about 60 measurable outcomes that gets changed, every so often. Like some things stay the same with modifications year after year, but it is an incentive program. And in this organization, what I was extremely proud of that I learned there was these 60 measurable outcomes are all about making patients' lives better and healthier at the end of the day, right? So I'll just pick one example. As a female, one thing that really comes to mind is making sure one of those measures was ensuring that all women age between 50 and 74 do get a mammogram every 2 years, because we all want to make sure early detection helps us, right, with a lot of the breast cancer treatment protocols that come thereafter. So think about that one difference it makes, and you're measuring 60 different outcomes, and you're being incentivized to do that. Well, that means when I hit all the cylinders for that QIP program and I bring in the 100% of the 100% of that incentive program, that means for all these patients, we're measuring their outcomes and we're hitting every one of those requirements. To me, that's something that I think is extremely powerful. In fact, one thing that, Rich, working with WellStack, that I really love about your platform and what it is able to do to bring and harness that data is the ability for us to really use those data sets, to mine those data sets, create those data definitions, and build out those outputs that you can actually rinse and repeat every single time for this program to drive the outcomes, because there isn't really a central place in today's world that offers that best solution. And so it's been something I've been really taking on as a personal journey of mine, like how do we create this service for everybody around the industry who doesn't have the ability to leverage that type of data to drive that type of revenue. So example, with this client I worked with, part of the QIP incentive program brought in like $60 million a year as an example. And that's a very big difference from a revenue standpoint, but how wonderful it is to be able to be incentivized to get that revenue as a result of driving patient outcomes.
That's huge. And Sundeep, from a kind of combination clinical and technical experience, where do you see common opportunities in bridging some of those operational gaps between operations and IT?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that I see a lot where there's still a big gap is in usability of some of the tools that we have, specifically EHRs, right? Since the inception of EHRs, they've kind of been plagued with the reputation of not being very user-friendly. And, some people would even go as far as to say that they're contributing to burnout among clinicians today. I think to me, that's still an area that's a big gap. And I'm happy to see that the vendors of these systems are actually focusing on that. And there's some great tools that they've come out with and new features that actually help bridge that gap. Unfortunately, some of the clients that we see and other organizations as well haven't taken full advantage of those. We still sometimes will see, physicians that are still using workflows and tools that they were trained on over 10 years ago. And there's a lot of new tools in the interim that would actually help their efficiency. And there's many new tools that are also available. So really, one of our goals at Ellit Groups is to really help maximize our clients' usage of the tools they already have, but also to really guide them on which tools they should put on their roadmap to improve the efficiency of their clinicians and potentially help reduce that burnout. Because for me, that's certainly a very important area that I would always love helping with is improving that efficiency and bringing kind of that joy of medicine back to a lot of physicians, because some of them seem to have lost it.
No, absolutely. And we talk a lot on this series about value-based care, and particularly sort of the broader transition to value-based care, and how data and data analytics, AI, machine learning, kind of modern technologies can really drive adoption, or just kind of helping the U.S. system move to more of an aligned incentive program. Maybe give some of your thoughts on this. Where you've seen successes, where you've seen maybe some technologies, or even just kind of your thoughts on the overall transition. Maybe Sundeep, start with you on this one.
I was ready to move on to the other question. Sorry.
Okay, we can step back.
Actionable insights.
No problem.
Was that one?
Sure. So
I can chime in and talk about value-based.
Yeah, let's step back. So on this show, we talk a lot about value-based care, particularly our broader transition to value-based care, and how data analytics, modern technologies can really play a role in helping our system kind of migrate to more of a value-based system. Pam, what are you seeing in terms of just the market transition, maybe some technologies that you're seeing as promising in that area?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the areas I looked at, and I think obviously you have to run operational dashboards, right, to support your day-to-day operations in terms of measuring metrics, whether it's patient safety, patient quality, et cetera. But one area I really like, because I've had the honor of serving in what I would call a lot of academic hospitals, is research and development areas, where you're looking at breakthrough medicine. How do you actually measure value and see whether or not those treatment protocols is the best for a certain disease category, right? Or a certain grouping of population management, as you will. So one thing I really enjoyed doing, and this is probably, dating my age a little bit, but specific for the HIV program, we were responsible for identifying and flagging patients that fell in a certain criteria for a treatment plan that was all research and development studies over a 1-year period that got looked at, believe it or not, 10 years later, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So they went back to this population to look at these HIV patients who went through this RD&D program and look ahead 10 years later. And they learned that patients that were flagged appropriately and had the opportunity to go through this treatment program actually showed had a longer survival rate and actually living healthier lives when given that prospect to be flagged, identified early in the stage, and put into this program to go through the regimen. To me, that's really profound, right? Because in our world of modern medicine, we're always trying to find ways to tackle the life-threatening diseases, right? Whether it's cancer, whether it's HIV, we're always looking for those innovative ways to solve those problems. And to me, when I think about data and insights, those are some of the most powerful. It's like, how do you find cures or treatment protocols that will help stop that type of bleeding and actually save lives? Absolutely. Or allow them to live healthier lives? To me, that's really important.
And I think that some of the technology, especially as I think about the promise of some of the most recent AI, solutions out there, is, hopefully kind of speeding up the iteration of that feedback loop in many of these areas.
Absolutely.
Right? I know that we talk a lot about drug discovery and things like that for the use cases, but around population health, being able to kind of better predict and forecast on maybe shorter cycles to really drive some intervention, I think.
And not wait 10 years later.
Yeah, exactly. I think that could be.
That's what the promise of AI will help us with when integrated right places.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah, and I think one of I know that, and I think you had mentioned it already, but at Ellit, you serve a lot of safety net hospitals and have a passion for those organizations, specifically serving underserved populations and others. I mean, tell us a little bit about some of that work, some of the care delivery improvements that you've seen in working with those organizations at Ellit.
Yeah, I think for me that resonates. Obviously, I think that came here as an immigrant. My grandmother and I, obviously lived off in the first couple of years off Medicaid, Medi-Cal, right? And even as she evolved into her older age, that population for Medi-Cal, Medicaid really resonates with me. And through those processes, it meant I was a personal advocate of hers, though, which makes it very difficult when I think about and put others in the shoes, like how many grandmothers, right, have a Pam Saechow, that's their granddaughter who speaks English and can be at every appointment, stay on top of calling the payers to see, hey, did you approve her referral, or calling the doctor's office and kind of proactively, manually pushing a lot of those agendas by advocating for her on a manual level. And I think for fast forward future, right, why we do electronic health record, why the advancement of AI and all of those things. For me, with the safety net, and culturally limitations, right, sometimes on resources, finances, and able to buy some of those big tools, if you will, that others are able to do. I think safety net becomes something where I want to maximize the IT investment in every way possible. To what Sundeep said earlier, part of our goal is, it's not the next shiny object or the next thing coming down. It's like, are you fundamentally using all of your core functions you've already bought and utilizing it to its fullest? And are you measuring it and monitoring it to drive the outcomes you're seeking, as an example, right? So for me, just a quick look ahead, you think about data analytics. What are some of the top issues that face us in today's world? And it's been a constant issue for a lot. Access to care. I can't get an appointment with my doctor, primary care doctor, 3 to 6 months out. I need help now. So what do I left do? I go to ED rooms, I go to urgent care, right? So when you think about data analytics, one of the things I've really enjoyed doing is with one of the organizations we work with, we really sat down and did a study around patient access throughput. And it started looking at the provider schedules. What were they staffed at, right? How long were they given for each of the visit type to be done? Why weren't they available? We found out through some research that people weren't available because they block out times to go to education or go to conferences. That was one reason, as an example. Other times we looked at where we had a lot of no-shows that weren't showing up. And as part of no-shows, how are we anticipating some of that capacity that we would lose as part of no-shows? Do we overschedule? Or Do we do something a little bit different, right? So the good news about that entire research was a lot of data analytics played into that by looking at different data points. At the end of the day, we streamlined the workflows. We looked at load balancing a lot of our provider schedules, and we also standardized the visit types because we realized there were some areas where we could see them less time, and sometimes where we have to like over allocate a little bit more time that we had already done. But and we also coupled it a little bit with overscheduling, about 15%, because that's what we're doing. And then we did a quarterly review of it to look at it. Do we need to tweak that? Or just come up with a different campaign to make sure people showed up for their appointments. That year, when we went through that entire program, we brought in lean process improvement to couple us with the process redesigns along with the data analytics. And at the end of that year, we were able to look back, and their next third available appointment used to be 9 months. It at least got brought down to 3 months, wow, which wasn't the best, but it was still way better than what it was. And so that's where continuous improvement comes through. And the reality, when you think about, that sort of scenario, is that you are what you measure, right? And what do you measure? You measure data. So in a world like safety net organizations, the other thing I realized too is in safety net organizations, we rely heavily on the reimbursements and the incentive plans. And anytime you're going after what we call the assigned lives, right, to be able to come see the doctor to get treated for care, you have to use data to demonstrate that you meet all of those requirements to get the maximum reimbursements. So for me, data alone is driving those insights or giving you actions you have to take. It's one way or the other. You're looking at insights for trending, stories you need to do, success stories, things we're not doing well at. But at the end of the day, you're taking those data insights and you're saying, what actions do I need to actually put in place and take forward to drive real results? And I think for me, safety net is more important than ever, where they're dependent on every reimbursement that comes their way, more so than any other, sector.
Absolutely. And Sundeep, have you seen additional, maybe metrics or things that you think are critical in kind of this type of measurement within underserved populations?
Yeah, I think when I think of one of the important data sets that I see these organizations look at, it is the social drivers of health. And a lot of them are focusing on that now. We've got a lot of clients that really care for underserved patients. And I'm happy to say that a lot of them do a good job at addressing these. The EHR vendors, again, have done a great job in developing tools that really puts this at the forefront and makes it very visible in the chart. And makes it easy for staff and clinicians to be addressing these. I've seen a few really impressive impacts from this. One example was an organization that actually used that data to determine which of their patients had food insecurities and where they were located geographically, and actually came up with a program to support the farmers markets in those areas to really help with that issue. And another organization did something similar with transportation issues. When they identified their patients that had difficulty getting to their appointments, they actually were able to set up a program with some of the rideshare companies to help with the transportation needs of those patients. So it was pretty impressive to see actually some of that in action. And, those are the kind of things that are really impactful for patient care.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we talk enough about the food supply and food quality aspect of healthcare and the preventative nature. I think that probably a lot, Pam, that we could learn from your grandmother in terms of the preventative aspect of healthcare, and probably as she navigated our system, it was probably mind-boggling to
Yes,
how I think we could have learned a lot from her through that process. But that's really interesting. I mean, I think a lot of those data sets that actually don't live in the EHR. I think as a general, healthcare population, particularly on the provider side, we could be doing a better job of facilitating some of those, more community-wide data sets and, bringing things together to help, drive some of those real systemic issues around access to, a lot of the drivers of health.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that struck me having worked, side by side with Ellit Groups and you all's team over a number of projects is really how well that you've built collaboration within your teams, right? So like the concept of building collaborative teams is something people write, probably dozens and dozens or hundreds of books on a year. And you seem to do a really, really great job of bringing together clinical, technical, kind of operational professionals into a really, collaborative, unified unit when you attack problems. Tell us a little bit about how you all accomplish that, because it's definitely something you don't see done as well, quite often in the industry.
Yeah, I think it actually started in early roots of my leadership. Actually, the first time I did a EHR install, we were early adopters actually of EHR. In fact, I still remember today, really partnering with several organizations and Epic to write the revenue cycle track, and kind of what that product would look like with Epic was actually quite a fun and awesome journey that we went through. And so I was given the opportunity to say, build your team. What will your EHR team look like? The first instinct I went through, because I started in healthcare operations in the pharmacy department, and when I went to IT, I realized it took me 6 months for the light bulb to come on to realize, wow, I can be good in IT because I can channel and advocate for the end user side of the equation, right? Like I'm in their shoes. I understand how that feels like. That was really important. So we started the EHR journey. The first thing I went through was I need at least a third of the people that are coming from the operations area, right? And some are clinicians. And when I say that, I meant I recruited people that were nurses, doctors as part of the EHR program. That was part of our methodology at one of the organizations. And also back office stuff and front office stuff, people who actually were registering patients, and people who were billers behind the scenes, that did the work. And so we took them and kind of went and did training and got them certified in Epic, because nobody understood the language and the advocacy of the use of that product more than them, who actually was the front line and everything, right? So the word use of Gemba, front line, in terms of valuing, in order to understand, appreciate, walk that front line and know how it feels to be in the end user space, I think was really instrumental. It really struck a chord with me for success. And then we coupled it with a mix of some consultants who've been there, done, and they've done like more than several installs, right? They've been through the rodeo show. And then some technologists who knew how to think technology and IT innovations and configurations. That blend just worked out really great. So creating Ellit Group, for some reason, it was like, this is a proven track record. I need this to make this team work. At the end of the day, we are all a care team, right? To drive the best outcome for our patients. So for me, I look at Ellit Group, our competitive advantage lies in not having actually a traditional sales organization. And I think Richie and I talk about this all the time, right? That I don't have a traditional sales organization. Instead, I want to focus on driving results and outcomes through all the professionals who's actually been there, done it, and they understand what is actually needed in the healthcare industry. And so for me, the blend of the, clinicians, the operations piece, and the technical expertise really brings that diversity to life, right? In order to foster that culture, and it really sets us apart, I feel like, in being able to relate to our clients and going to a much deeper level. And I think people value that in the clients that we work with, that we've been in their shoes and we understand that. So to me, that's kind of what's really made our collaboration work really well. I think it's diversity of the talent on our team and the diversity of the roots of where everybody came from. Covers all those spectrums.
And I'll just add that, Pam's done a really good job of developing that culture at Ellit Groups, where communications and collaboration is really part of our fabric. So for my part, what I try to do with the technical teams and clinical teams is to make sure on the technical team side that they kind of understand the why behind what they're doing and the impact that it can make clinically, the good and the bad, right? If they do a poor job at what they're working on, the negative impact it can have, but certainly the positive impact as well. And on the flip side, we want to be sure that the technical teams do a good job conveying the limitations and the specifications of the tools and software that we're implementing, so that we can really help our clients through some of those tough decisions they have, either implementing or continuing or changing any of their tools in the future. So I think that's just kind of been part of our culture at Ellit Groups.
And I imagine that kind of common sense of mission, right? I mean, having mission at the center, culture at the center, it does keep teams aligned, right? Where naturally, I think if you think about clinical, technical, operational stakeholders, there's a tendency for them to kind of fray if just sort of left to their own devices. It's just the nature of, I think, humans.
Yeah.
But when you have that core foundation around culture, around vision, I think that can be totally the catalyst of making or breaking that dynamic. So it's pretty awesome what you all have built.
Thank you. And I think Sundeep can attest, one of our greatest inspiration till today at Ellit Group is when we are at a client site and we're working with them. I love visiting the frontline users, checking on them, see how things are going, seeing how things are being done. And at go lives, especially, rounding with the executive team and just getting to know the users and see how the tool's working for them. I think it's really important to kind of have that focus and purpose that we didn't just turn on a technology to go live. We turned it on to make an impact. And we want to see that impact is happening to kind of continue further shaping and refining kind of how the care is being delivered. So I really enjoyed. I think we keep patients as a purpose in the forefront of all of our discussions, no matter which venue we have in the company. And we still you have to do rounding with intent.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the future, both kind of from either the Ellit perspective or just, either of your thoughts on what is exciting, what's concerning, scary, right, in the healthcare industry that you see, that you see of either of interest or something that you're working on, right now.
Well, yeah, since we're on go ahead, Sundeep.
No, I was just going to kind of dive into something we briefly touched on earlier, and that was, AI. As we know, all of these new tools and technologies have more and more data coming into them, right? With the, increased popularity of wearable devices that send data in, the increased number of devices that integrate into EHRs, there's a lot of data coming in. And a lot of that is structured, but today some of that isn't in progress notes, et cetera. But in the future, that also will be, right, with the evolution of NLP progressing as it is. So I think a lot of that volume of data that we'll be seeing will be driving a lot of these AI models. And I think that has a very strong potential to really improve health outcomes and health policy. But we do have to kind of dive into that a little cautiously. We have to make sure those models are trained properly. We have to have good data to test those models. And we have to be very transparent about the limitations of those models, because adoption on some of these that we've seen, if we're not transparent about how they're coming to their conclusions and what they can and can't do, people don't adopt these tools very willingly. So I think if we can overcome those barriers, I'm very optimistic about the value of those tools that are going to really help improve our health outcomes coming up.
And are you seeing any specific tools or technology organizations or even healthcare organizations that are leveraging, certain tools well? I know we're very much in a sort of exploratory POC phase as an industry, but anything that you could highlight that you've seen that, works well, or organizations you think are thought leaders in this area?
I think right now the most popular form of these tools that are being implemented are probably more in the documentation space and the kind of chart summary space, where these tools are really helping reduce the burden of documentation and really doing a better job of presenting volumes of data in a small amount of space so that people can really understand a patient's health history quickly now that we have decades of data on patients. I think in terms of organizations, I think there are many of the larger healthcare organizations and many of the academic places seem to be kind of leading the charge in some of those, because I think they just have more resources to be able to do that. But I have seen success at some of the smaller healthcare organizations as well that are kind of taking that leap of faith into that area and being successful with it.
Well, I know for me, a couple organizations we're working with that I know have said really good things, and we're looking into the ROI and the efficiency that will bring is around the help desk space. because we do help desk as a managed services, and you're always looking at affordable ways to manage that without true outsourcing it overseas, as an example, because all of our help desk managed services, whether it's traditional, clinical service desk, help desk, tier one, or the patient service desk around my chart, we're all done with US talent. And so competing with others, always looking at affordability without compromising quality. So one of the products we're actually looking at, I've heard now from several clients, and a lot of them are both in safety net as well as academic and not-for-profit sector, is this product called Hyro. That it does introduce some our AI into automating some of the help desk agents. And so that's an area I know we're looking at. We do use today TalkDesk at one of our client sites, and we're finding some really good early signs of efficiencies to be gained, as well as productivity and how we're incorporating that AI function within that. But I think we can go a lot further. And so we are exploring some of those things. But I think anything we're looking at is always about improving efficiency, being more productive, and finding a better cost model. Because as the industry continues to be challenged to do more for less, we also as a company need to make sure we're finding ways to deliver solutions that will be more affordable for them and less costly. So I think that's something I continue to do, and I think that's a couple of things. And then, Rich, in talking with Matt the other day too, just what you guys are doing with WellStack and Hartford, I thought also was another really good example. I understand you guys will do some, lead some focus topics at the upcoming Vive session, but those are some of the other stories I've heard too. So just in general, I think there's a lot of really, innovative, forward-thinking organizations that are continuing to charge the territory on trying different things and figuring out what works the best, that sticks, and is actually really meaningful value.
Absolutely. And, a lot of course, the subject of this series is around, data strategy and, kind of finding alignment between your current resources and what you have, your infrastructure and everything. It's always it's a big undertaking, right? And I think with in the age of AI, leaders are being asked or even at times demanded to move ever faster in terms of getting to, that data strategy that can be the foundation of trust for everything AI, or
trust is the key.
Analytics, right? Processes. And so, Sundeep, as someone that's involved in, has been involved in, the clinical and technology integration, what do you think is kind of key to achieving that true alignment between data insights and patient care?
Well, as I think about that topic, I think one of the keys is progressing through the analytics journey. And by that, I mean the different types of analytics that we have. We have descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive, right? Descriptive is about, summarizing what happened in the past. Diagnostic is about maybe giving us a cause for why that might have happened. Predictive was, okay, I've done these things or I'm about to do these things. What's going to happen? And prescriptive is about, if I want this outcome, what do I need to do today? So we really see that a lot of healthcare organizations are really kind of still focused on the first two of those, descriptive and diagnostic, and not so much on the predictive and prescriptive yet. And I think the future and really the power of using this healthcare data in driving improvements in healthcare are going to be in utilizing the latter two, predictive and prescriptive. And I think, again, there's some barriers to that, and that is having adequate resources within informatics and within data analytics. We're going to have to really focus on training those resources better so that we have enough of them to support all of this work that will be coming in the future in these areas. So I think that's one of the big keys.
And Pam, what advice would you give healthcare leaders that are, looking to make the most of their current resources and kind of help turbocharge and accelerate their strategy?
Yeah, I would definitely say that for me, I want to make sure that those data resources actually understand not just the data input, but the why. I think Sundeep mentioned that earlier today, right? Why behind it? Because it actually allows you to be more deliberate in understanding where in the workflow should the data be pulled from, because who's entering that data and where should we be pulling that data from? A lot of times when you're a data person, right? I've actually oversaw data analytics as a BI leader. One of my job functions was to oversee the BI team, and I cannot tell you how many times that sometimes when you present the data, I'm sure everybody can relate, that the data tells a story. If people don't like it, they're like, your data's wrong. I don't trust the data, right? So I always make sure that for my team as data analysts, I'm like, you understand the why behind what they're trying to achieve, so you can have a deeper understanding of it, and then where should that data be come from, because we get challenged a lot on that. And so we data mark, like, where's it coming from, who's inputting. So before we even dive into the reports layout and what it looks like, it's here's how we went through our strategy and approach in pulling this data for you, so that we can be in alignment with how that data is being pulled from and where is it being pulled from in the workflow, so we can understand that that's at least coming from the same source. So we pivot our conversations for here's the report, and then people jump into reading the report and go, that's not true. That data is all wrong. It's not what we're looking for. And then you're dealing with a emotional reaction versus, wait, what is this story telling us? Maybe it's actually true. It's giving us actually very valuable insights. Even though I don't like what it's telling us, it's very valuable. And it's telling us things we should change. So instead of being upset about it, maybe embrace that, and let's spend time assessing the data and figure out what steps we need to take. So for me, I think Sundeep mentioned this a little bit, but fostering that data literacy and knowledge is key to like helping people shift that mindset, right? And when I look forward a little bit in our world of data, big data, right, where more data is going to come at us fast and everybody's going to want information faster than anything, there's a foundation you need to have. That, what did they say? You can't run until you can crawl. So it's like, what, crawl, walk, run. Well, there's a little bit part of that in the world of data. So to me, it's like you need to have a common data definition in your organization. I think oftentimes people still lack that without sitting down and saying, when I define it as X criteria, I call this length of stay, are you defining it the same way? Because 3 different departments can have 3 different answers. So then as a data analyst sitting there creating the data, who do you follow, right? So you need that alignment within the organization about what is that common definition and what is the common metric that aligns it towards a patient-centric goal. Who is the regulatory or who is the right body that should be determining that definition? We all follow and adhere to it as a stakeholder, versus everybody defines themselves. And oftentimes I feel that is the biggest breakdown for success, when you're not aligned with common data definitions, right? Or common metrics that mean the same thing to all of you across at the end of the day. And so to me, that data literacy and that foundation of having finding those data stewards and making sure you have the same common understanding. You can bring all the AI in the world you want and create all the data outputs you want, but it won't provide the value or be meaningful when you can't be in sync with what it's telling you. And so to me, being, overseeing the BI team for a period of time, that was always my biggest challenge. And I learned at a very, right away is like, how do I get people away from the emotions on jumping to conclusions by reading the story before understanding the how? So then I stepped back from a BI standpoint and said, okay, we went through this body. This is our definition of what you're asking us to do. Are we all on the same page? Great, check. Next one, let's move on. Here's where we pulled the data from, because here in this organization, these roles put in this data, and this is where it comes from, and this is where we pulled the data from. Do we understand that? Check. So you kind of like have these checkpoints to make sure every step of the journey, yes, we're on the same page. So then by the time you unveil the story, you're not spending the political capital to go back and explain how we got here because they don't like the way the story is being told, because it's not the story they want to hear. And to me, that's kind of been my largest lesson learned, which also presents what I consider a significant opportunity as we progress in the world of data analytics, that you have to have that foundation core, be crisp and aligned within the organization, and it needs to come from a patient-centric view.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you mentioned those topics of understanding the actual operational workflow as well as that patient-centric view of like attributes. Because I think that, oftentimes when we develop data models, parts of that get missed, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of focused on, the patient 360 view, and you think about, okay, what are the kind of attributes and metrics that surround a patient, and we build these kind of, models that surround a patient. But I feel like sometimes it's often not represented that snowflake of data is also moving through a process over time, right? And the complexity of that is actually very, very difficult. And so I think that, having those two intersecting and joining perspectives on the process and data is, to your point, absolutely mission critical in setting that trusted foundation.
Yeah, and I think you need to understand like the type of personalities that come from the data worlds, right? When you think about data analytics, a lot of them are very much developer mindsets and very technology based. And Absolutely. So they're just looking at data and go data in, data out. This is how you produce the data. And then when you start dealing with real world, like creating data metrics, right? And then we're assessing care gaps. The data person looks at, like, well, I pulled the data. That's at least where it came from. And then I pull in my ambulatory person or my clinical person. I'm looking at the care gap. They're like, that's not even where we order it. Why would you pull it there? So that's kind of been my dilemma, but it's been helpful, as we got back to earlier today, why that collaboration and that communication across different disciplines and that subject matter expertise comes to bear, right? So I think one of the gifts I had at the time, I was overseeing the data analytics. I definitely did not come from a pure technology data background. So managing the team was actually very good for me for that timing, because I was able to bridge the gap by bringing the right operational person to the table, the right build, like what module or who would have built that particular piece in the technology side, with the data in between to help translate the journey and be able to produce data that I would say is much more precise and accurate when it comes to the interpretation of it at the end of the day. And you can explain that. So I was very proud to leave that organization building a model that they still use today. And really, that's the same organization who produces nowadays, even with the QIP metric, they're like hitting it out of the ballpark every single year now. But we built it. It was a program of people that came together to collaborate and communicate and assess that data and make sure that data was right before it got submitted anywhere else. And so I think that's why I say it's also the greatest opportunity. Our greatest advantage is data, right? And getting the information to be insightful and to take actions. But our greatest opportunity also is, let's make sure before you walk or run that we're at least on the same page on understanding what we're trying to do here.
So Pam, tell us a little bit about, some of the core guiding principles at Ellit Groups, how you've been running the business, and some of the things that you've been thinking about this year.
My guiding principle has always been do good, have fun, make an impact. And here at Ellit Groups, while we do have clear goals and objectives, we obviously need to have a goal post at the end of the day. We are running a business. I recognize that. But I really don't let, we in the company don't let quota define our mission. And instead, I really feel like our philosophy is, this philosophy really helps us to drive our approach here in this organization that fosters the culture where I believe meaningful impact and success is naturally done through intentional and thoughtful planning. And success comes as a result of that, not the other way where we're incentivized just by driving quotas. And it's something, I've been like over the year been thinking about, and as I move into the future, think about, because I'm sure you can relate, Rich. A lot of people always ask me, why don't you invest in, you need a real sales team. I don't know what a real sales team looks like for me. I can't quite comprehend that. It's been a tough thing for me to absorb and figure that out.
That's great. So what I'll do, we'll take that, we'll cut that, and I'll just record right now. These have been amazing insights. It's been, really great to spend time with both of you. I really, really appreciate the time today, both Pam and Sundeep, it's been great to have you on the show. And just thanks again for spending some time and for all the amazing insights.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Look forward to a great 2025. Look forward to
Absolutely.
continue working with you and the rest of the organization.
Likewise.
Thank you for having me and Sundeep on today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.